Are we ready to do our episode now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome to episode 7.
Welcome to episode 7. I'm your echo this time.
Listen to episode 6, was it? Where I was your echo, or 5? Somewhere
It was
in there.
3.
3. I
Either way.
don't really lost track.
Yeah.
We're at episode 7, which means in the podcasting world, we are at a stage of more episodes posted, at least, than something around 98% of all other podcasts.
Exactly.
Correct?
So something like 98% of podcasts they quit before their 7th episode.
Right.
So much
so that
like,
means as long as we get to episode 8, I think we're home free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we're going to get to 800.
Oh my gosh, a lot of episodes.
Yeah. But so much like 1 out of 10 businesses succeed, so 9 out of 10 fail. It's very similar to podcasts, but probably even higher because there's a lower barrier to entry.
Isn't it interesting how the numbers just don't really change much?
Right.
Like the 80-20 rule with business, 80% of your customers will, or 80% of your market will listen and 20 will,
yeah.
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
But really, if like the action is there
Yeah.
and the action is consistent, you can really count 100 people, 10 will do X and 1 will do even better.
And the rest will just be bums.
Or just go back to their busy lives.
Yeah. Or
You
that.
could say
Or
it
both.
less cynically.
Yes. Sorry, didn't mean to offend those who are listening. But
We
you're
didn't
probably
mean to
thinking you're the
offend
top
those
20
bums.
anyway. They probably think they're the top 20, but they aren't. And that's, I found, common in
True.
coaching, consulting, personal development circuits.
However, I would bet the people who are consistently listening to this podcast are part of that top 20%. I'm going to bet a quarter.
I think he's buttering it up. I
No,
think he's
I'm serious.
just kidding.
Because it's like, again, if you think 100 people have seen our podcast, 10 of them are probably listening, and 1 of them are like actively listening. And if the person listening right now is that active person listening, they're kicking butt in life.
Right. But today we are not necessarily talking about numbers. We're actually trying to get to talk about relationships, which if you have been listening to our podcast for the last whatever episodes, you know that we really have a hard time with this topic, which I am hopeful in 2021 we can really do better at that. And just
as far as being more comfortable talking about it?
That, open up to it, relax about it. I think that's a big word for me.
Yeah.
Just be like, it is what it is, and that's fine.
It is what it is.
Yeah. So...
But I think we just learned we all need to date. We need 100 partners so that we can get 10 good ones and then find the one best. Is that what we just learned?
A lot of people.
I mean, there's 7.7 billion people in the world. 100 isn't that many.
Just go start knocking on doors with your neighbors. Hello. You're in a convenient area.
With your dating resume.
There's my application.
If you knock on 100 doors, you're going to get 10 potentially interested partners and then find one meaningful relationship.
I wonder if Matthew Hussey, if he ever listens to this episode or hears that clip, what he would have to say. He'd probably be like, I never thought of that.
He'll be like, you're not wrong, but don't do that.
Don't do it. That's actually an interesting... I wonder if anyone's actually tried that. I mean, there has to be 7 billion people in the world.
It would make a good YouTube video.
It would make a good
like
YouTube.
channel.
I have to try this.
Hi.
I kind of think it also depends on your neighborhood, though.
No one answers the door anymore. Do you see how we're still avoiding the whole topic, though?
Yeah.
I just want to
Here we
point that
go.
out.
See?
But it is a hilarious imagery.
It is funny.
But
I mean, half this podcast is about humor, so we're not doing that bad.
Yeah, we're still on brand.
Still on brand. Let's just blanket statement, which I am so glad I could say it's the best cop out ever, is that especially with the relationship topics, we have no idea what the fuck we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, is there anyone who's really good, in the grand scheme? Out of 100 people, there's probably 10 who are okay. and one person who's really good. But I doubt that's true. I don't think there are people who are like particularly good at relationships.
I think there's people that are good at navigating if a relationship is good or bad for them.
I think that's not that many.
Right.
Well, this is
like
trauma
I said,
speaking.
I think there are people. I didn't say how many. Yeah. I said I think there are people that can navigate if a relationship is good or bad for them and leave or stay depending on that journey. Right. Yeah. But overall, yeah, I think we're definitely in a global, I guess you could say, crisis in terms of how do we do relationships. But on one side, because of a history nerd, I also see the benefits of today because 60 years ago, men and women were entering relationships where one of them was gay and one of them was an alcoholic, and it would led to a lot of issues and closed doors.
And I think this leads into my monogamy argument.
Tell us about that.
So, because I don't believe in monogamy. So, and it's something that I just feel like in the world that we live in today, it's so unpractical that, and just so unsustainable that it's a failed institution. And so I can see some of our audience members who are in monogamous relationships just cringing.
What do you mean?
What do you mean? Yeah. But deep down, I think a lot of people who are in committed relationships feel that there's something not right.
Yes. So I'm on the side where I prefer monogamous relationships when I enter a committed relationship. So I do prefer that.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's probably dealing with conditioning and societal upbringing for sure. I know that's definitely there. But I also think that everyone's different. And so some are okay with monogamy and some are not. And that's okay.
And that's okay.
That's also our blanket statement. That's okay.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. But this idea that only monogamy can exist, I think definitely is not true.
But let's go back to kind of your history buff, people entering relationships where they have to hide who they truly are.
Well, this is also a society where you hid any imperfections in general. So my grandmother is a great example of this on my mom's side. So this is the late 40s, early 50s. Yeah. Okay. And she was actually engaged to another guy other than my grandfather. But she was the prettiest girl on the block. She had all the perfect things about her and looks and status, as it were. Okay. And then I forget what it was, but something happened to where it was shown that she wasn't perfect.
Okay.
And he literally said, "We can no longer get married because my parents don't approve and I don't approve because you're basically not perfect."
Because she farted in front of him?
Something like that, yeah. It was very minuscule in a way.
Yeah.
But in society at that time, we're looking at America, Colorado, California, New York, doesn't matter where you're at. In the early 50s, you had that picture catching up or keeping up with the Joneses idea, right? And so she was really heartbroken and traumatized by that. So she just went for the perfect image of a relationship again and then married my grandpa. Okay. And they both went into it basically with that idea, but with the blanket of, but we also like each other and we're in love.
Is the son your mother's or father's son?
Mother.
Mother, okay.
So that led to my grandfather being very absent in the whole relationship. He just worked all the time. And I know that there's been talk about unfaithfulness on both sides, right? Because they were extremely unhappy. And my grandmother became a very intense alcoholic when her kids were very young. So it just created a lot of toxicity, but because society said you couldn't have divorce, you had to be the perfect picture outside when the doors open, at least.
You can't talk to your friends about the struggles in your relationship.
None of that.
Because...
Yeah. So it just led to a lot of issues that have trickled down. And so this idea of being perfect, which we talk a lot about in the podcast, have let that go. and because this idea of perfect led a lot of pressure that led to a lot of toxic relationships. So it's not just monogamy isn't working, it's societal standards as well.
Okay, I agree. But as those societal standards have not changed much.
To a degree, they are definitely relaxing.
I think the conversation is open more, but it's still there's so much that has to be hidden, right? So two people in a relationship. So this is kind of my rationale for this. And I've had this viewpoint for a long time, but I didn't realize I had the viewpoint until probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, when I really learned about what non-monogamy was, and that there's a lot of people who believe in this way of life as well, and have navigated a way to really make more healthy communication, more healthy relationships.
Yeah.
So if you think something, and I think the numbers are higher now. We should like research some of these statistics before an episode.
That's what the post graphics below will
we'll say,
showing.
Just kidding, it's this.
Just kidding, it's this. And that's fine.
But if you say half of all relationships and half of all marriages end in divorce, right?
In America.
And then I would argue that at least half of the marriages that don't end in divorce, those relationships are not healthy or happy.
Possibly, yeah.
They're just staying together because either they need to, or for the kids, or because they're conditioned.
Yeah, all those things.
Whatever reason. So now we have 75% of all marriages are toxic. And I would argue it's probably even higher than that. So 25, so 1 out of 4 marriages.
Theoretical statistics here.
Yeah. Are actually at least comfortable. But I would imagine there's still, in the 1 out of 4 that aren't necessarily toxic, there's unfaithfulness at some point in the relationship.
Maybe.
So, like, why go into marriage if there's a 75% failure rate?
Well, let's define marriage, because that's a thing.
I'm talking about institutional marriage.
Right.
And I would argue that, like, the numbers are higher for those who don't get married.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But here's also a thought, is that a lot of people think when they get married or into a partnership, it has to last forever, right? There's that romantic notion and a long-term societal norm that's been there. Again, this is relative to every person, really. Because one person could be with one other person their entire lives, which I've met many people who have had that and have very successful, happy lives and marriages, and they've been in my family. Then there's people like my grandparents who that didn't work out. And then actually my grandfather remarried later to the grandmother I grew up with.
Okay.
And they had 40, almost 50 years of literally an awesome partnership and marriage.
Okay.
Now, do all relationships have issues? Absolutely. Do I know what those issues were? No. But I can tell you, I remember in our family, I'm not going to tell you exactly how this is structured in the family tree because it's kind of complicating. But this couple was literally hitting their 90s. Okay. And it was at Christmas and they're at, chaotic house and stuff like that. They're kind of like the oldest people in the house. But they were the most fun, especially with each other. Oh my gosh. It was so cool to see how amazing their relationship was at such an end portion of their life.
Okay.
And I asked people, I said, have they always been like this? And they're like, yes and no. They had their rocky years and they had their happy years, but overall, they were like, I'm so glad I stayed with this person, right? So they literally were married for like somewhere around 75 years until one passed away. And it was so cool to see that. But then you get people like me, who was literally married for like 3 years because I entered into a romantic notion of what a relationship was.
Yeah.
So again, it's totally relative to the person. But also, I believe that second marriages, third marriages, or partnerships is fine as well.
They are, but they have a much higher divorce rate.
And that's fine too.
Yeah.
Like, again, I think there's so much pressure around what you have to be in a box. You either have to be monogamous or you have to be poly. Or, it's like, you just do you.
And I agree with that to an extent. But where I disagree is because a lot of times you just doing you means you're not communicating effectively what your needs and wants are and what your expectations are from a relationship.
I think that's a statement that could be put in any type of relationship.
I agree, but I think it's more common in traditional relationships because we're not taught to communicate.
Correct.
Which is a huge issue, and that does come from parents in toxic relationships being taught by their parents in toxic relationships. And now we're the offspring of toxicity that's been around for a very long time, and it's deeply ingrained in us. And I think more people are so emotionally damaged, and we live in this world of instant gratification where we have Tinder where you can swipe right, or any female on social media gets so much attention from men that if they're in a relationship, they always have a choice of, well, I could go with this other guy who is really into me based on his social media stuff. which is not healthy.
No.
And it doesn't lead for a healthy relationship. But when you're in a committed relationship, always having from both sides too, and it's not just women getting this, men get it too, when there is always that constant pull and like, what do you call it? When someone's tempting you, that constant temptation, it doesn't lead to connectedness without a lot of work and a lot of personal development to get to that work.
I agree with everything you're saying. I think we just need to make a distinction here.
Yeah.
Is that can be literally in any relationship, and it may be very common in actual marriages, contractual marriages, but it's literally common for every single human, at least in America and maybe, Western world status. And
I would actually argue in business relationships too, it's very similar.
Yeah, and this is that just communication piece.
Yeah.
Right? And also a lot of self-awareness is key with that too. What do you actually want, and are you able to communicate that? Because I was in a relationship with a guy for 5 years, and he could not tell me what he wanted or needed, therefore I could not provide. It was just a guessing game every day. So it was like, I'm trying to show up, but it's not doing what you need to feel like I'm showing up in the relationship for you, feel like you're being cared for. So, right? And so it's like, you really do need to have an awareness piece to communicate what you actually need. And that's a big issue today. So a lot of people don't know who they are or what they want.
I agree.
And I think we're all really don't know that, but there are some that have figured out more than others.
And it's, it's an ever evolving thing, but we're not taught that it's okay to do that work traditionally. Like it's shifting, which is why we're here, right? And able to have these conversations, because behind closed doors, we talk about this kind of stuff, which is really cool.
Mostly,
which is why I wanted to do this podcast too. And so like let people into these conversations. So what do you think is the best part of a monogamous relationship?
Honestly, it's dependability and consistency for me. It's a lot of time less wasted. In my world. I'm like, I'd rather have one person in a committed relationship or long-term relationship than have to deal with serial dating, than have to deal with serial partners, than having to deal with all of that, because I'm just like, I don't want to deal with people really anymore.
Yeah, dating sucks.
I haven't even started. You know what I mean? It's like, I've never actually had to go on a date.
Really?
Seriously. And this is not very common for a lot of people. I've met a few women and men who have been in this situation for me, but it's not common.
Okay.
So my first relationship was in college, but we were in the same dorm and we were in the same friend group, and we never went on a date. We just hung out like cafeteria, walking to class. Like we had time together, but it was never like,
and then somehow
let's go spend time alone intentionally. It was never like that, or never like, hey, we just met, let's go on like a time together. It never had that.
Okay.
My marriage was somebody I knew actually at church. So again, another friend. And then the third guy, 5-year relationship, I actually rented a room from him. And so we never went on a date. We just entered a relationship.
Okay. So you entered a relationship pretty much from proximity. Like you were just
that's a great way to put
person.
That. Yeah.
And you're like, well, this sounds cool.
Well, for me, I'm finding that I really need to know the person before I feel like I could really enter into time with them.
But you haven't actively gone out to do that with the person.
No, because I don't want to. It's a waste of time to me. I'm just like, I don't even want to bother anymore.
Right? And so I think a lot of times, a lot of monogamous relationships are just because they're the closest person. And you bond together because of proximity. And then we're expected to build this life with this person because they were just there. I think that happens more often than not.
Yes, because you meet this person at work. That's usually when, I think that's one of the top things. Is
like
that you
work, school,
church, some sort of social gathering, right? Which, how else are you meeting these people? I mean,
That's a legit question. And actually, because I'm not drinking right now, like.
If you're not going to a bar.
Yeah, and there's no bars. It's like, how do I meet anyone ever? Like, not even just for dating, just to hang out.
Yeah.
Like, what do you normal adults do for fun?
Matchmaking sites, which I hear is actually not like Bumble and stuff, like actually matchmaking services. Especially for professionals and successful entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
They're starting to enter matchmaking services because it's, again, saves time, which I'm like, I could appreciate that.
Right. Yeah. I haven't tried one, something like that. Have you?
I've looked into
like
them.
that?
They're usually rather more expensive than
They're
my interest.
The one years ago I was looking at, it was like, it's just lunch. So they would like book lunch dates for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's brilliant. Because then you just go to lunch and you're like, hey, who are you? I'm like, I don't know. Who are you?
Okay, let's talk about kind of like, again, opening the doors, right?
Okay.
So historically we've had closed doors practically since the beginning of time, right? You have to have this image of power, image of perfection, image of high society status or money status, even if you're broke. For example. Yeah. In the 1800s, there's actually a book out there called Victorian Home. It's actually really good. I read it in college and it just really stuck.
Sounds like a really catchy title.
It's actually really interesting because every chapter is actually just about a room in the Victorian house.
Okay.
So we're talking middle class. So it had probably 3 bedrooms, pretty large house in the city, suburby area, right?
Okay.
So when you think of like Little Women or whatever, that's kind of the house that you're probably thinking of.
Okay.
So every chapter is about a room in the house. Now, when I had the assignment of the kitchen, now here's the interesting thing with the Victorian home. Okay, this is just mid 1800s. This is just 170 years ago. Okay.
Yeah, it's so crazy.
Right?
Yeah.
Everything in the house where you brought guests was the best. Like you had the tapestries, you had the carpets, you had the dinnerware, you had all those things, right? So think about today, people get like, they don't really now, but they used to get china for their weddings and like silverware and like anything that had to deal with guests, right? Okay. So 1800s, you have like everything where your guest is fancy. You go to the kitchen, rats are literally in the kitchen. You go to the bedrooms, there's nothing but a bed. There's nothing on the walls. There's like nothing. Every penny was put into presenting themselves to other people.
Okay.
So if you really think about that and you think of keeping up with the Joneses, you think about today, you have to have the right education, the right job, the right car, the right clothes. It's continuing. I mean, that's just humanity in some ways. But this idea that you have to have perfection and you keep everything bad or cheap behind closed doors where guests or others don't see you. So let's put that into a relationship perspective. Okay, let's take Victorian home. Behind closed doors, husband could be abusive, could be a complete drunkard, wife could be cheating with the bellboy, kids could be just feral. But when guests came over, it was a perfect family. It was a perfect home. How many times have you heard, oh, it was such a perfect relationship those people had, but then you come to find out like the wife just beat the husband or vice versa,
Or they killed each other or something dramatic.
Or all of a sudden like some sort of homicidal thing happened, right? They were just the normal neighbors, right?
Right.
It's this need to hide imperfection. And so again, I like this podcast because it can open those doors.
Yeah.
So we can have less Victorian home issues and be more minimalists, really.
Yeah.
Right?
So
disasters.
To me, what I think is the healthiest part of a non-monogamous relationship, and the thing is, that's a word that's kind of thrown out there, but there's a lot of different types of non-monogamous relationships. Whether, I don't even know all the terms. And when I first started like thinking about it, I thought the same thing, like, hey, once upon a time, it was just called dating, right?
Yeah.
So it was just like, if you're dating, you can go see multiple people and it's not a big deal. And then that, I think, got like watered down. And I've seen people like frustrated, like, hey, I'm dating, and yet this guy I'm dating is mad that I'm seeing other guys, or the girl I'm dating is mad, but you're not in a committed relationship. It's just dating. But there's no definition of boundary. So the one thing that's consistent throughout the various types of non-monogamous relationships, when they're defined that way, is a definition of what the boundaries are.
Yeah.
So at first I was like, hey, this non-monogamy thing seems cool. So let's just kind of go with it. I don't think we need all these different categorizations and these speculations. I think it's like ridiculous. People just want to define stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But as I've gone through a few non-monogamous relationships, what I found is actually those definitions are really, really important so that everyone's on the same page, which is kind of the same thing like we talked about in a previous episode with like trauma and mental
intricacies.
The word now they're using is like a neuroatypical. So anything that's not neurotypical. So when you're able to define the things happening in your mind, you can understand like what that neuroatypical behavior is.
Right.
So when you're able to define the boundaries of your relationship, say, hey, I'm comfortable with X, Y, and Z happening, but not comfortable with, A, B, and C happening, then there's no confusion.
Yeah. Well, again, you just put that into a monogamous relationship as well.
You can. However, I think it's human nature to want to be intimate with multiple people.
Unless you're asexual.
Unless you're
goodness,
asexual.
Which I'm finding, I'm actually leaning more and more towards, which I didn't even know that was a thing literally until like 2 weeks ago.
We talked about it once at the cabin.
I didn't know what it meant.
Really?
I really didn't. I saw a TikTok and I was like,
freaking TikTok.
What is this? Because I really relate to what they were saying.
And I asked you about that.
I didn't know what it meant, I guess. I didn't quite fully grasp what you were explaining.
Probably.
Because this asexual thing, it doesn't mean that you're not having sex. Doesn't mean you're not in relationships. Doesn't mean you're not even interested. It means you're probably interested. But you're just not sexually aroused by seeing or being around people. Because like when she said that,
it's not like a driving factor,
right? So if you're in a monogamous relationship, like, don't worry. like for me, I'm like, seriously, no one ever had to worry. Yeah. Now there's demisexual, which is you have to be emotionally involved before you can enter into committed relationship, and that's definitely more me, I guess.
Okay.
So there's like a hybrid you could have of that, like phase 1 and phase 2 in a way. And asexual, if you go and Google this stuff, it's definitely an umbrella at this point because it's still being discovered. And again,
and defined.
Opening doors allows exploring those areas that we haven't before, because sex was just around a man and a wife, and it was only when she was ovulating.
And only missionary.
Exactly.
And only to have kids.
Exactly. And that's actually been a thing for a very long time. People think that's new. No, it's been around since before the medieval era.
Seriously?
Yeah, especially in Europe.
Horrible.
Well, the Catholic Church kind of invented a lot of that language anyway. Oh. So, history buff coming in. Yeah. So, looking at this TikTok and this gal's talking about asexual, just how we're not, like asexual speaking, how we're not physically sexually attracted to someone just because they took off their shirt. We might admire it, much like a piece of art, but we're not going to be like lustful. Like I know people in my family, sister, I feel like I could say this because she never listens to my podcast. So she's going to find out like years later and she's going to murder me. And she's more open about it because, again, she felt like she had to be behind closed doors and only be interested a certain amount of times or in certain relationships. Now she's much more free about it.
Okay.
She's incredibly sexual. I am not. Like, we are so opposite. So I always felt like, even in high school, college, and even today, I feel like I'm abnormal because I'm not lustful per se. And so it's just like, I'm not seeking for it, craving it necessarily. Like, I'll explore it, I'll have fun with it, but at the same time, I'm not someone who's like, gotta do it every day, every week. Like, no. Like, there's very different areas of sexuality, relationships, and just humans. So, again, I don't think that there could be a statement saying that only poly or only monogamy. It's like there's so much more diversity and intricacies because we're humans. And I think we all need to just chill. Be you and do you. If you know what you is, that's another piece.
And that's the key, is really figuring out what is it and being honest with yourself in spite of what society might say is normal or abnormal, which I think that's the biggest, so I think it's one of the biggest obstacles to healthy relationships. Has there ever been like a guy in your life who has shamed you for not being overly sexual?
That was every day in my marriage.
Yeah.
Every freaking day. Because he was hypersexual. Mm-hmm. And I was like, once a month. You know?
Yeah, and how frustrating of a combination of that for both of you, right?
But that wasn't discussed, right?
It
was just assumed his version and my version, right? So yeah, again, communication breakdown for sure.
Yeah. So now he's hypersexual. You're kind of asexual or demisexual.
Both.
What if he wanted to go fool around with someone else who he was not married to and had no interest in being married to, but he needed to get just his sexual arousal?
At that time, I would not have been okay with it. Mm-hmm. Today, I don't think I still would be okay with it. I'd be understanding and be like, okay, well then let's end this relationship because it's obviously not working.
Yeah.
Right. So again, it's identifying what's right and what's not right for you and communicating.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, it's like these foundational concepts that we don't actually approach.
Why wouldn't you have been okay with it back then?
Oh, because I wasn't aware of what proper communication expectations, and neither did he. Mm-hmm. Like I was 22, he was 21 when we got married.
That's really young, honestly.
And that didn't used to be the thing in culture, but it is today. That's actually pretty young to get married.
Now, yeah.
Yeah,
it used
60
to be like
years ago, it's a little different, but today it's like we are very emotionally I guess you can say emotionally uneducated in how to do those things.
Yeah.
Because we're not talking about it.
Yeah.
At home, at least. You know, God, talk about sex in my home when I was young, heaven forbid.
Yeah.
Like, I was under the concept, because it was never talked about, I was under the concept of Friends, the TV show, just because they're dating absolutely meant they're having sex. And my mom was like, that's not true. So, because we never talked about it. So my imprinting was television, which is probably the worst thing you could possibly get.
Most of everyone are age.
Yeah, which is like the horrible education when it comes to building relationships, communicating relationships, healthy relationships, like anything like that. So, because it's all romanticized in drama. So let's just assume that's a good blanket term that most people, that's where they get their education on that. And that's led to a lot of problems.
Look at the real world.
Yeah.
Which started,
like, Mr. Roger wasn't telling me about these things. Like, maybe he should have. Maybe it'd get canceled, though, because it's PBS. So who knows?
Can you imagine, like...
the king being like, I like boys. Don't know if that would go well. Which he probably would have been all about, but I don't think the show would have allowed it.
I feel like we're broaching some good stuff here.
We are. We're getting better with relationship topics, like, big.
We'll find out when we watch it.
Yeah.
I mean, do we have anything else to discuss? Do you have any questions?
No. Oh, so David, what was the one thing you took away from this conversation, you learned in this conversation, or something that you will implement in the future because of this conversation?
So the one thing that I learned, actually, is that TikTok is a wonderful place to learn stuff.
It really is.
Because not as much anymore, but it's an open source way to convey information. And you get to see these perspectives into all these different people's lives where they're talking about, like, hey, this is my everyday and it's ADHD. And then I'm like, wait, what? And so I can relate to them in this way that I've never been able to relate to someone. And you can find something like, hey, this is my asexual life and this is blah, blah, blah. And you can be like, wait, I've never heard anyone discuss that before from this person who may be across the world. But it's just a 15-second glimpse into their life.
Yeah.
I think it is the most powerful thing, and it's just crowdsourcing conversation, really, is what it's doing. So what did you take away today? I
think what I'm going to implement into my future from this conversation is just exploring a bit more on those terms that we were talking about, understanding the language. We said this before, but understanding the language behind, sexuality and relationships and all of those things to really find the broad understanding of what's there and what relates to me.
Okay.
Because when you're stuck in that box, if you have to be in monogamy in a marriage with a guy or gal, right? Like, it's very status quo in a sense. So you're limited in knowing what's there. Mm-hmm. And so I think, broadening a bit more on that is going to be really good for me moving forward to knowing more on what I need in a relationship. Because I know I prefer monogamy. Mm-hmm. I just respond well to that. I relate to it so well.
Right.
But how do I find someone that works in my own version of monogamy is where I need to find that.
Yeah, and that's actually huge.
Yeah, it is huge.
Can I give a tip on that? For
our audience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The single most valuable thing that's helped in a relationship for me was creating what's called a relationship contract. Mm-hmm. Where it's you sit down, you identify with your partner, you identify the most important things like monogamy or children or duties in the house or
even finances,
boundaries, roles chores, really literally everything you can think of. You write it out like a contract, what the expectations should be for each partner and where the boundaries are. Mm-hmm. And it's the least sexiest sounding thing, right? Yeah. But it's really sitting down with someone and doing that, it's really bonding. Mm-hmm. And it's showing hey, we're in this together. We're going to work through these arguments because we've already talked about what happens when I'm mad at you for not taking out the trash.
Right.
Or what happens when I catch you looking at that girl online or liking her Instagram photo. Now she doesn't have to go cut the bitch. She can say, I guess it was okay for him to go like that Instagram photo.
Refer back to the contract. Funny. Texting, I'm so mad at you. Why? Because you looked at a girl on Instagram. Refer back to the contract.
To Article 7, Paragraph 2, Item 3. I can 3 Instagram bitches photos a month.
Yeah.
That's number 3.
But the contract is really just to solidify you're on the same page. That's really all it is. Actually, that has existed in the past, or I think it's still around today in Christian churches, usually that I know of in my past, is that there is premarital counseling with the pastor or someone higher elderly in the church. I think I did that. I can't quite remember. I think we did do that with our pastor, but we'd known him for a while and we didn't know ourselves very well. So I think it just kind of was But you want to, I actually think with the contract idea, if you're not wanting to write a contract or you want to get started in a conversation, having that mediator with that counselor or some sort of, emotional mediator is really a good idea of some kind.
That's a really good idea.
And a lot of people are like, but you're getting counseling before you're even married? It's that's actually good. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to have to get counseling after you're married, even though I think that's still healthy. It's just I've been in pre and post counseling on both sides. Mm-hmm. And I'm a huge advocate for counseling and anything, especially in relationships.
Yeah. So I've never done relationship counseling per se from an actual counselor, but I have had coaching on it.
Yeah, it's just a mediator for a conversation that you're not having at home. Huh. That's really all it is.
Where does one outside of church? Where would one find a relationship counselor? I bet we have some relationship coaches in our following here. That
I'm sure we do. I can't think of anyone right now that I can shout out to.
Shockingly, me neither. If you are a relationship counselor, tag yourself below.
Yeah, and maybe validate everything we said.
Yeah, or don't. Tell us that we're full of it, and we're totally wrong on X, Y, and Z.
Ready for a fight. How to make a fight in 4 words or less. Totally. Well, I think that concludes episode 7, which took 2 hours to do.
Yeah. We got through it though. And I want to thank everyone for listening. If you could, we are always looking for a way to grow our community. So we'll find a relationship coach and put some tips and tricks back in our Patreon.
Sure. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great place to have it.
Obviously, this is not planned. So it just became one though.
If you want your tips and tricks posted in our Patreon, let us know. So reach out to us and you can reach us going to...
Oh, yeah. Beacon.io/IDKWTFPod. That's our handle for everything. Yes. It's Beacon.io/ I don't know what the fuck podcast.
Yes. And Beacons is kind of like Linktree, which a lot of people know what that is, but it's way better. So if you're not using it,
do it.
I recommend it.
It's free. You can actually go to our Beacon and get a Beacon from it.
Yeah.
So
try that.
And you get $20 of credit.
Really?
Not we do, but they do.
Yeah, that's
which
great,
is like really cool.
They should get that.
There you go.
If I was listening, I would get that.
Shameless plug. And
sign up for our Patreon, because that's where you get the best stuff. And we're going to have some huge giveaways here soon, which we're going to talk about, me and Anastasia, right after this, about how we can spoil you guys with wonderful gifts.
News for me.
For being part of our community.
Yeah. So thanks for listening. Go to our Beacon, and we'll see you on the next episode.
All right. And you are my favorite person.